we're now talking about DE and I. The E is arguably the most important part of that because that's where the equity comes in. And if you aren't solving that problem, that's the accountability, right? So, if you're just talking about diversity and inclusion, it's too easy to just say, we need to be aware of some things and, we need to make sure everyone's invited to the party and that, but what is the equity part of it? Like, let's look at the wage gap, how much let's look at where we're recruiting from. The organization that your user group supports after every single meetup is one of my favorite. Looking at recently and presently incarcerated folks, teaching incarcerated people how to code, giving job opportunities once you get out of prison. That is doing something because in this country, we know that people are disproportionately imprisoned by race and income bracket, but mostly really race. So that is doing a huge thing and to kind of equalize, but there has to be accountability. And if you don't talk about DE&I, and if the accountability in corporations doesn't go all the way up to the board, then it's not gonna happen. You can't just bury this role in some HR department and expect, a company to change overnight. One of the things I really love about Cockroach Labs is there is accountability for diversity that is an okra at the board level. So Spencer, our CEO, has to answer these questions, and every single all hands meeting, it's one of the first things he's talking about. And it's awesome. And when I joined, it was by far the most diverse place I'd worked in tech. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. And literally my first week, I heard him saying, not good enough, we have to do better. And I was like, I love it, amazing. But that's the conversation that has to have. That accountability has to go to the top, and there has to be incentives because we know that it's money that is gonna make this happen, right? So if, you don't get your bonus if you didn't hire a diverse team. Because there's so much data out there that shows you if you hire a diverse team, you're hiring the best team. Like, it's proven so many times. So it might take you a little bit longer, but in the end of the day, you're going to get the payoff economically, which is what most companies are in it for. So that's all there. It's really just the bias that's keeping it from happening.
Yeah, I think there's a missing conversation about having the courage to change your beliefs, right? As Lisa said, just wake up and say, I'm gonna tackle my unconscious biases today. Because it turns out when you do that, it's like deciding that you're gonna lose 50 pounds and have a six pack. It really hurts. It's super painful, right? Even though I'm biracial, sitting through unconscious bias training, dealing with my own issues and realizing, I've seen it this way. It's not like that. Boy, am I a bad person. Oh, but this is really uncomfortable. Okay, so can I build some muscle to sit with the discomfort and tolerate it? So the discomfort that it's gonna take requires courage to step into it, but I think honesty to say, this is gonna be hard. What are the rewards for us as a company on the other side? What are the rewards for the individuals for participating and showing some material change in our makeup and our results? Those are part of an overall change movement that starts with courage, right, and ends up with measurable behavior. And I think the belief that has to change in the middle is it's not something to be bolted on. This is not a t-shirt, right? Diversity is not your donation to Black Lives Matter. Diversity is your belief fundamentally, right? Replacing whatever the core belief in your mental kernel was before, where you felt like if everybody's kind of similar, we can go way faster, to believe if everybody on the team is different, we can go way farther. And that our job as a company, our job as a team is like longevity. Let's choose the path to real impact on the world and not something that looks easy. So I think that's the big shift. Fundamentally, I believe, and I've learned, much as Lisa has said, is that the most diverse teams actually produce consistently the best business outcomes. And there's a very simple thought experiment that you can do. We can guarantee that whatever work you're doing right now, your team is making a colossal mistake that's gonna really hurt, you're gonna be really bummed, and you'll go over it in your AAR. Somewhere in the company or somewhere in the industry is someone who, if they were on the team, that mistake is already obvious to them, and they could show up on day one and be like, what are you doing about that? And you'd go, oh my God. So if you had that person, so many more failure modes would be immediately obvious and you just avoid them, and you'd build a better thing the first time. So you start to think about diversity perspective, debiasing cognition. No individual can really debias it themselves. We can build a protocol, for dealing with how do we talk and cognition and do cognition together. But we have to build a complete team, right? And at the beginning I said, we are necessarily incomplete by design. So how do we build a protocol of how we talk with each other, and how do we build teams that are complete? And I think that's kind of the core principle to me of what is not being talked about in the diversity conversation. It's not a good idea. It's not a t-shirt, it's not a donation. It's actually a flip of a core belief to how we build great outcomes.
I love it when his Buddhism comes out. He's so much nicer than me. I agree with all of that. I have less patience, maybe as an African American in the United States. I've had a lot less, I'm a little more cynical. And I don't think we can wait for people to get to that realization on their own. I think there needs to be totally unacceptable consequences for that type of behavior. And this is where I'm saying incentives, you don't get paid your bonus if you don't, do this work. Because if we wait till people volunteer to decide today's the day I'm going to make this very painful change that needs to happen, not enough people are going to make that decision.
Right. So the rewards have to follow it, and I think there's a stick element for sure, but there's a carrot element, right? Who are the archetypes that we hold up and say, be more like this person, like they crushed it? One way you can signal that in companies is on promotions. So if you have something that's really important to you, you can literally gate promotions on that attribute. Now, is that something that you want to do for every level in the company and every discipline? Hard to say. But you might say, hey, to make vice president, you need to have like excellent scores in everything, and you have to have an A+ in this way that we're measuring the construction and harmonization of diverse teams. And so all of a sudden, what used to be, punching above your weight, all of a sudden isn't. You have to move the goalposts. So there's ways to do that too. Fundamentally, I'm super optimistic. I'm, first generation. My parents are both immigrants, right? So this kind of belief, they came to the US chasing not just the American dream, but the Californian dream. So that definitely, it's kind of where I live. So you could call it patience, right? But like in my genetics, we have limited life experience in the US. So I believe in sort of these constitutional principles, and I believe like we can do that. I know that's not everybody's experience, and there are long histories, right? It's a tapestry with many different components. So when I come at it pragmatically, it's probably partly optimism and partly just mental habit.
And it's fine. It's like you said, there's a long history. So, and I think some things people will step up and say, okay, this is the problem. I think I can tackle, and I'm going to. And then there's other things that are just beyond where people can go mentally, and you just need a little more nudge to say this has to happen. But you know what? We're going to do it together, and we're going to, we're not going to leave anyone behind, and we'll do it in a safe possible space. It's even harder when it's not corporations and it's community, because you're volunteering to be there. I can't really hold anything over people's heads, right? So, I can, especially when we started seeing our open source communities going from physical locations to online, there was a lot of behavior that surfaced that just doesn't surface when you're looking someone in the eye. You just don't do that, right?
And that's one of the beauties of being in person, is like we have millions of years of evolutionary, sort of braking mechanisms, right, that slow us down and make us respond in appropriate ways, that those breaks for some people don't seem to be there in a digital medium.
Yeah, and I think also you just get away with that. You don't think anyone's on the other end of it like a human being, right? And you're just putting stuff in communities.
Well, that's exactly what I mean, right? So all of a sudden the ethics go to heck because somebody has they've lost the plot.
Yeah. So then you have to, you have to address that, and it's hard. It's really hard to build diverse communities. You have to work really, really hard, and especially here in the Bay Area, where most of the rooms I walk into in tech are not anything close to diversity. I mean, I think it's even gotten worse in the last 10 years. I'm just looking, at the user group, who's showing up.
Sure.
And it's getting less and less and less diverse. And so it's frustrating. So you have to work really hard. But, it's always rewarding when a woman walks up to me and says, thank God you're here. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't for you. Or I'll get a note from someone else, I'll host a meetup and they'll say, are you going to be there? And so, I'm hitting the thing, I'll be there. But, I started realizing how important that was, just to be there as an example. And but then I would find that person and I would introduce them to 4 more people, and I would get them in kind of a mentoring situation and let them feel comfortable. And because we got to make sure when we do start to diversify our communities that we also embrace that and we don't lose our members. But that's one of the hardest things I've found, and especially online.
So I want to share something that was a practice that Urs Holzla introduced about 4 years ago at Google when I was there. He felt that the bias problem was so substantial that getting unconscious bias surfaced was really important. And then how do you start solving that problem? So he led a section where he said, we're going to start by unbiasing perf. Perf is the performance review process at Google that the whole company is basically, frankly, cadenced around. And it's so fun that at Google you do perf twice a year. But what he did was, instead of having it as a bolt-on and saying HR is going to do all of your unbiasing training, instead I'm going to take the train the trainer and I'm going to teach you. And then you, as my vice presidents, are going to train the directors will train the managers, and on down. So everybody really owns the message. And as you do the training, it lives much more in your body. As you train others and you ask questions and you help them sit with discomfort, that's really powerful. And you were able to take training from managers you didn't report to. So that created a little bit of a more comfortable system. By the end of it, like, I really had mastered the material. I feel like that had been an incredibly effective training for me personally, selfishly, as one of Urs's VPs. But I think it made an impact on everybody who participated. And I've taken some of that knowledge with me ever since. If we could copy and paste success patterns like that, rather than just sharing, things that aren't working, which is important but doesn't always tell you what to do. If we could just copy and paste those things, the code you didn't write but you just used, we could have a library of patterns that really help us unbias the industry, company by company, team by team.